You know what's funny? We spend so much time trying to be there for someone, emotionally available, supportive, consistent. We think that's what builds connection, and it does to a point. But here's the twist that nobody talks about: when you're always there, when your presence is a guarantee, it quietly loses its weight. You become like the furniture in someone's life, useful, reliable, but unnoticed. You send the good morning texts, you ask how their day was, you check in, you make time, you accommodate their schedule. And because you do it so effortlessly, because love for you is something you give freely, it begins to blend into the background. They don't wake up thinking, wow, I'm lucky they're here. They wake up thinking, they'll always be there. That's the dangerous part. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because we as humans take comfort in constants, and then we take those constants for granted. It's not even malicious. People don't sit there plotting to undervalue you, but they get comfortable. They start assuming the way you show up is just the way things are. And ironically, the more consistent your love is, the more invisible it becomes. That kind of generosity, when unreciprocated, starts to feel expected. And here's what happens: they start showing up a little less. They reply slower. They stop noticing the little things. The spark that once lived in the connection, it fades, not because you stopped being valuable, but because your value stopped being felt. That's why distance can be a teacher. Sometimes your absence teaches someone what your presence never could. When you're no longer there at the end of the day, when your name isn't popping up with warmth and reassurance, suddenly there's a silence, a gap, a question: where did they go? And that silence, it forces them to feel. It forces them to reflect. Maybe for the first time, they look at how they've been showing up. Maybe for the first time, they realize how much your presence softened their days. Maybe they finally notice what they'd become numb to. And let me say this: you are not responsible for someone else's realization. It's not your job to disappear just to be seen. But sometimes, stepping away isn't a game. It's not manipulation, it's clarity. You recognize that you've been over-delivering in a connection that's become one-sided. You decide to stop carrying the emotional weight alone. And that moment where you let go, is often the first time they really feel your worth. Because while you were present, they never had to miss you. They never had to live in the space where your warmth used to be. You were easy to access, so they forgot that you were a choice. The tragedy is, people often don't value what they didn't have to fight for. So when you're always emotionally available, always accommodating, not because you're weak, but because you're loving, they forget that your presence is a gift, not a given. So yes, sometimes they only notice when you're gone. But that's not a reflection of your worth. That's a reflection of how asleep they were to it. And when they do notice, when the calls start coming in, when the apologies arrive, when the I miss you texts start popping up, I want you to remember their realization is late. It's valid, but it's late. You already knew your value. You just needed the space to let them see it too. They only noticed when you were gone, because that's when your presence finally became undeniable. People often think that if they wait long enough, if they're patient enough, if they keep showing love and support, eventually the other person will change. That maybe, just maybe, the person will wake up and realize how good they have it, and start showing up differently. So they stay, they wait, they keep investing. They think love alone will be the catalyst. But change doesn't come from patience. It doesn't come from staying longer, trying harder, or giving more. Real change, meaningful, lasting change, happens when someone is faced with loss. When they feel the consequences of how they've been behaving. When the comfort they've taken for granted is no longer there to cushion them. There's a difference between someone realizing they should treat you better, and someone simply enjoying how well you treat them. If someone's life is still running smoothly, if their emotional needs are still being met while they barely lift a finger, there's no incentive for them to do the work. They already have the best of both worlds. Your loyalty without their effort, your love without their consistency, your emotional availability without their emotional maturity, so they don't change. Why would they? That's the part that's so frustrating, because you see their potential, you know they're capable of more, and so you keep holding out hope that your love is enough to inspire growth. But love isn't always enough. Sometimes what actually jolts someone awake isn't your presence, it's your absence. It's when you finally stop showing up, when you stop over-explaining, when you stop fighting to be seen, heard, appreciated. It's when they call you and you're no longer there, when they reach out and you've gone quiet, not because you're playing games, but because you've outgrown the need to beg for basic effort. And then only then do they start to feel what they couldn't hear in your words. Because your presence used to speak in love, in texts, in reassurances. Now your absence speaks louder. It's no longer hypothetical, it's not a warning, it's reality. That reality is what forces reflection. It stings, it creates contrast. Suddenly they notice the emotional gap. They remember the little things, the way you understood them without judgment, how you cared in moments when no one else did, how your support was a constant they never had to earn. It's the discomfort of not having you that creates the potential for transformation. And you know what's important to realize? It's not cruelty to step away, it's clarity. Because you're not punishing someone, you're protecting yourself. You're creating a boundary that says, I'm no longer investing where I'm being depleted. That decision, that moment when you choose peace over potential, is what finally shifts the dynamic. Now here's the hard part, when they come back. When they say, I've changed. When they tell you they see it now, that they understand. Your job isn't to blindly trust their words, it's to look for evidence of growth. Did they do the inner work, or did they just get lonely? Are they motivated by genuine accountability, or by the discomfort of not having access to your love? Because there's a difference between missing you and becoming someone who can love you properly. And if all it took was losing you for them to realize what they had, then you have to ask, were they ever really present in the first place? Or were they just coasting on your love, assuming it would never run out? You deserve someone who grows not because you disappeared, but because they saw you while you were still there. Someone who didn't need to feel the pain of losing you to understand what they had. Someone who rises to meet you, not only when you're gone, but when you're standing right in front of them offering your heart. Don't confuse their reaction to loss with readiness for love. There's a pattern I see way too often. Someone pulls away, disconnects emotionally, or treats you like an afterthought, and then when you finally walk away, they suddenly want to change. They start saying all the right things. I didn't realize what I had. I've been thinking. You mean more to me than I showed. And because you care, because you felt something real, you start wondering, maybe this is what I was waiting for. Maybe they finally get it. But I want you to pause and ask yourself something deeper. Why did it take your absence for them to see your value? Why did they have to lose you just to realize they cared? Because the truth is, the right person doesn't need to watch you walk away to wake up. They don't require heartbreak to become present. They don't need the threat of losing you to treat you like a priority. That's not how healthy love works. When someone truly values you, when they're emotionally aware, when they're ready, they show up while they still have you. They listen before you go quiet. They notice your effort in real time. They don't wait for the damage to become irreversible before they take you seriously. But someone who isn't ready, someone who's emotionally unavailable, inconsistent, or stuck in their own patterns, they might only realize what they had when it's already gone. And it's not because they suddenly became the person you always hoped they'd be. It's because they finally felt the impact of your absence. Their motivation isn't love, it's loss. And there's a huge difference between the two. Anyone can miss you when you're gone. Missing someone is easy. It doesn't take growth. It doesn't take effort, and it definitely doesn't mean they're suddenly capable of giving you what you needed all along. It just means they noticed the hole you left behind. But don't confuse that feeling with love. Love isn't just the pain of missing someone, it's the action of valuing them when they're right in front of you. Think about this. If someone only starts fighting for you after you've left, where was that fight when you were still choosing them? Where was that urgency when you were still hoping they'd meet you halfway? It's not that they couldn't show up. It's that they didn't. And it's not your job to keep returning to see if they finally will. We romanticize this idea of someone coming back, full of realizations, saying they see everything clearly now. But the most important kind of recognition is the kind that happens before the damage is done. It's the quiet moments where someone chooses to appreciate you without needing the threat of absence. It's the person who pays attention before you have to ask, who makes effort before you grow tired, who shows love before you have to beg for it. And look, people are human. They get distracted, they mess up. They don't always know how to communicate. But there's a difference between human imperfection and emotional immaturity. If someone is truly right for you, they don't have to lose you to realize you're worth keeping. And this is where self-worth becomes your compass. Because when someone comes back, it's tempting to believe that their realization is proof that they've changed. But don't let someone's epiphany become your trap. Their regret isn't the same thing as readiness. Their guilt isn't the same thing as growth. You deserve to be loved while you're still there. Not because someone fears losing you, but because they're present enough to recognize your value in the moment. That's the kind of connection that's real. That's the kind of love that lasts. So when they come running back with all the right words, ask yourself, are they showing up now because they miss you, or because they're finally ready to meet you? Are they seeing you clearly, or are they just reacting to the echo of your absence? Because if it took losing you to wake them up, then they were asleep for far too long. When you finally decide to walk away from someone who's not treating you the way you deserve, it's easy for guilt to creep in. You might start questioning yourself. Am I being too harsh, too cold? Am I punishing them by pulling away? But what most people don't realize is that walking away isn't an act of punishment. It's an act of protection. You're not trying to make someone suffer. You're trying to stop yourself from continuing to suffer quietly while hoping things will change. You reach a point where staying hurts more than leaving, not because you don't care, but because caring has started to cost you your peace, your self-esteem, your sense of emotional safety. And it's in that moment that you have to choose between keeping the connection and keeping yourself intact. That's not selfish, that's necessary. Sometimes we stay in situations because we think our patience is love. We confuse endurance with loyalty. We convince ourselves that staying even when we're hurting is noble, that we're giving them time to grow. But love shouldn't cost you your dignity. It shouldn't be measured by how much pain you're willing to tolerate, while waiting for someone to become who you hoped they'd be. When someone repeatedly disrespects your boundaries, dismisses your needs, or gives you the bare minimum while you give your all, continuing to stay doesn't teach them to treat you better. It teaches them that you'll accept less than you deserve, that your love comes without standards, that they don't have to rise to meet you, because you'll keep lowering yourself to meet them. So when you finally choose to walk away, not out of anger, not as a game, but because your emotional well-being demands it, you're not punishing them, you're choosing you. You're saying, I love myself enough to not stay where I'm not seen, not heard, not valued. And here's what often happens. The moment you walk away is the moment they wake up. Suddenly they start reaching out. They want to talk. They want to explain. They want to prove they've changed. But that's not because you punished them. It's because your absence removed the comfort they were leaning on. It created a space where your silence forced them to face what they'd been ignoring. People often only understand the weight of your presence when you stop carrying the relationship for them. And it's in that quiet space, that powerful decision to no longer overextend yourself, that they realize just how much they relied on your effort to keep things alive. But here's the truth. If someone only realizes your worth after you've left, that's on them, not on you. You didn't abandon them. You just stopped abandoning yourself. You stopped justifying bad behavior. You stopped shrinking your needs. You stopped hoping that love would be enough to fix what wasn't being acknowledged. And that's what makes the difference. Walking away is never easy, especially when your heart is still attached. But staying in something that chips away at your self-respect every day, that's harder. And the longer you stay in that space, the the more you start to believe that maybe this is all you're going to get, that maybe this is love. But deep down you know it's not. Real love isn't about struggling to be enough. It's not about convincing someone to see your value. It's about recognition, the kind that doesn't need prompting, the kind that shows up without threats or ultimatums. And until you protect yourself enough to walk away from what's not serving you, you won't create space for the kind of love that can. So don't ever feel guilty for choosing peace, for choosing clarity, for choosing yourself. You didn't give up on them, you stopped giving up on you. There comes a point in a relationship, or even just in the way you care about someone, where words stop working. You've explained yourself. You've asked for what you need. You've tried to communicate with love, with logic, with vulnerability. You've repeated yourself in softer tones, hoping maybe this time they'll actually hear you. And when that doesn't work, you get louder, more emotional, more direct. Still nothing changes. It's in that space, when your words have lost their power, that silence becomes your last act of truth. We don't talk enough about how powerful silence really is. It's not cold, it's not manipulative, it's not cruel. In fact, silence can often be the most honest response you have left. Because when someone has stopped listening, what are you really doing by continuing to speak? You're just draining yourself. You're giving energy to something that keeps showing you it's not ready to receive it. Silence isn't passive, it's decisive. It's you saying, I've said everything I can say. I've shown up in every way I know how. And now I'm stepping back because this is starting to cost me more than I can afford. It's a moment of clarity, where your peace matters more than the hope that maybe they'll finally get it. And what's interesting is that silence often says what words never could. Words can be argued with, they can be dismissed, misunderstood, ignored. But silence creates a space that demands reflection. When you stop explaining, when you stop reaching out, when you stop trying to be heard, that absence becomes undeniable. That quiet speaks volumes. And for the first time, they actually have to sit with it. There's no more noise for them to tune out. No more reassurance from you to lean on. Just the void. And in that void, they start to realize you're really not there anymore. The version of you that tried, that fought, that stayed, that version is gone. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started caring about yourself. And here's the beautiful, if not painful, part of silence: it forces them to speak. If they ever will, it shows you whether they're willing to meet you halfway, without you pulling them there. It shows you whether they even notice the difference. And more importantly, it shows you how much energy you were spending, trying to keep something alive that wasn't giving back. Silence is often the most self-respecting thing you can do in a situation that's gone nowhere. Not out of pride, not out of ego, but out of a quiet recognition that you deserve more than one-sided conversations. You deserve to feel seen without having to explain your worth over and over again. There's this misconception that if you care about someone, you have to keep showing up, keep trying, keep proving that you're all in. But the truth is, if someone can't feel your love when you're speaking, they might only truly understand it when you stop. And no, that doesn't mean silence is a tactic. This isn't about waiting for them to come chasing after you. This is about letting go of the need to be heard by someone who isn't listening. It's about finally choosing peace over performance. Because you shouldn't have to perform your pain just for someone to take it seriously. You know your heart. You know the effort you made. And there comes a point where that's enough. You don't need to convince someone of your value. You just need to stop trying to convince the wrong person. Let your silence be the evidence that you've moved on from conversations that only ever echoed back frustration. Let it be the moment you chose dignity over desperation. Because when you stop talking, the right people will notice, and the wrong ones will simply fade into the quiet you left behind. And that quiet, that's where you start to hear yourself again. One of the most liberating and heartbreaking truths is this: you don't have to be angry to be done. You don't need to scream. You don't need a dramatic final argument. Sometimes the quietest ending is the most powerful one. It's the moment you realize that closure doesn't come from them, it comes from within. And when that moment hits you, not with bitterness, but with clarity, that's when you know it's truly over. We're taught that leaving has to be loud to be valid, that if it doesn't end with tears, or shouting, or a slammed door, it somehow wasn't real. But that's not how most endings happen, not the deep ones. The most important endings are soft. They come when you've cried all your tears, when you've reread the old messages, gone over every memory, tried every way you know how to make it work, and still, nothing changed. Not them, not the way you feel when you're around them, not the ache in your chest after yet another disappointment. And eventually you just stop. Not because you stopped loving them, but because you started loving yourself more. It's subtle at first. You stop replying right away. You stop checking your phone so often. You don't rehearse what you'll say if you run into them. You stop trying to decode their mixed signals, because you finally realize that clarity was never the issue. Consistency was. You gave them chance after chance to meet you, and they didn't. And now, without even needing a big explanation, you're letting go. Not out of spite, but because your soul is tired. That's the kind of ending that changes everything. Not just in your relationship with them, but in the way you relate to yourself. Because when you walk away from something that no longer feeds you, something that constantly made you question your worth, your sanity, your standards, what you're really doing is choosing to come back to yourself. And that's what closure really is. It's not getting answers from them. It's not the perfect conversation where they finally say all the things you wanted to hear. Closure is when you stop waiting for them to validate your feelings. It's when you stop needing their permission to move on. It's when you accept that their inability to love you in the way you needed wasn't about you being unlovable, it was about where they were. Sometimes people don't grow while they're with you. Sometimes they don't wake up until long after you're gone, and you have to be okay with that. You have to understand that it's not your job to stay and help someone evolve at the expense of your own peace. You were never supposed to break just to teach someone how to be whole. So when you walk away, do it gently. Do it with grace. Not for them, but for yourself. Let it be an act of love, not revenge. You don't need to be remembered as the one who burned the bridge. You'll be remembered as the one who built it, tried to cross it, and finally walked away when it became clear they weren't meeting you on the other side. People may never understand the depth of what you gave. They might never acknowledge how hard you tried, but that doesn't matter anymore. You were there. You showed up. You loved with your whole heart. And now you get to love yourself enough to stop. And that's not weakness. That's strength in its most peaceful form. Not the kind that needs to prove anything, but the kind that knows when something is finished, and doesn't cling out of fear. The kind that trusts that letting go isn't the end of your story, it's the beginning of your healing. So don't wait for them to notice the silence. Don't wait for them to chase. Don't wait for them to finally become the person you always believed they could be. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply leave. Quietly, fully, finally, and never look back.